So I've been using the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max for a little over a week now, and the simple truth is they offer an undeniably similar experience to what we got with the last gen phones, which were in my pocket up until this past iPhone launch day. But if you think I'm here to tell you about how the iPhone is the same every year and how Apple fails to innovate, you got the wrong guy. With each new release, I really like to hone in on the subtle but meaningful changes Apple makes to their already fantastic handsets. This year is no exception, and I think there's plenty to dig into and be excited about as Apple continues to perfect the iPhone 12 Pro and Pro Max models they launched 4 years back. First up, both of these phones are literally bigger and I love it. The Pro Max model has already been a pretty big phone since the 12 Pro Max jumped up to 6.7 inches from 6.5 inches found in previous gens. Well, this year we got another increase, maybe an overdue one at that. And believe it or not, it actually makes a difference. On top of the borders being even more deliciously thin, the extra 0.2 inch jump to 6.9 inches makes the 16 Pro Max feel more like a pocketable tablet. I find typing with two hands on this thing to be even more comfortable, and consuming content with it too is even more of a joy. But I think the smaller Pro model got the bigger upgrade. It's been stuck at 6.1 inches for the past 4 years up until now, and it finally got a meaningful size bump that I think a lot of people will appreciate. Now users who want the highest end iPhone experience with Pro features can enjoy a display that sits in a very nice sweet spot without adding a whole lot of extra unnecessary size and heft. This 6.3 inch display is almost equally compelling to me when it comes to everyday usage and more, so I'm really excited to put it to the test in a separate video where I switched to the smaller Pro model altogether for a week or so stay tuned for that. Regardless of which model you go for though, these displays will look even better with one of my Skyline 3 wallpapers. I put together 25 plus shots of the best of Manhattan skyline from the World Trade Center to Hudson Yards and more. They're formatted for mobile, tablet, desktop, and laptop devices, but are most especially fitted for iOS 18 and iPadOS 18 lock screen and home screen setups. If you want to support me and snag this pack, my link is down below if you're interested. And to build off of wallpaper aesthetics, I gotta say Apple really outdid themselves this year with the new Desert Titanium color variant. For years, I thought the Gold 10s or the 14 Pro models looked kind of tacky, like cheap jewelry compared to the more classy white and black variants. Then Apple decided to remove the color option altogether from the 15 Pro line, which was an interesting but in hindsight great choice. I think they took the year off to rethink a gold that would fit the subtle, refined aura they're going for with the Pro line, and they've certainly achieved that with the Desert Titanium. It's a wonderful, earthy, slightly sandy bronze as the name suggests, and it's super reminiscent of the past gold models like the Champagne-esque 5S, which introduced the color altogether, along with the 6, 7, and 8, which did gold justice as well. But beyond design aesthetics though, the battery life is noticeably better compared to the past two generations. As much as I loved my 14 and 15 Pro Max phones, they were definitely a slight downgrade when it came to overall long-term screen on time. Thankfully though, the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max not only get bigger batteries, but also a chip that's better for battery or power efficiency as well. A18 Pro's TSMC 3nm Gen 2 chip architecture, also known as N3E, is apparently much better in this regard compared to the first gen N3B architecture found in the A17 Pro and M3 chips. So on top of marginal boosts in computing power, power efficiency is back to where it should be and then some, with Apple boasting 4 more hours of video playback with both new models compared to the last gen models, figures that I'm inclined to believe or take at face value based on my experience with them so far. Battery life aside though, next up let's talk about the camera control. Something definitively new about these new phones, and it's also apparently kind of controversial as well. I've seen, heard, and read so many mixed reviews about it, and they're valid, especially if they're coming from people who've actually went out of their way to live with it for a minute. But I gotta say, I personally love this thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, it isn't revolutionary or anything, and I'm still very much using the on-screen controls, especially when shooting in portrait, but having a dedicated camera button on an iPhone just makes sense. If this was purely a camera toggle and shutter button, I would be pretty happy. I think it's placed in a great spot, as it can be pretty easily pushed by your left, middle, and ring fingers, along with your right pointer finger, especially for use as the shutter button. You can also use your right thumb and like the meat of your thumb, if that makes sense too. I mean, hey, it works for me. As for the other functions though, you have to lightly press, double press, and swipe to access them. Thankfully, there's a distinct difference between a push and a press, which are super easy to differentiate pretty quickly. But anyway, using the camera control to switch between the different cameras is an S-tier feature in my book, and super useful when shooting in landscape. The exposure, styles, and tone sliders are A-tier as well, since you get a nice live uninterrupted preview of your image without having your fingers all over the screen. Meanwhile, the depth and zoom sliders are like B and C tier, maybe even worse if you're like me and don't really use those features. But if you're someone that enjoys the fake depth effect, cinematic mode, or smooth zooming like you're a parent recording their kid's soccer game or piano recital, no shame, you'll really appreciate these aforementioned sliders. All this to say though, the camera control is immediately useful for quickly toggling the camera, for use as a shutter button, for quick exposures, switching the cameras when capturing photos or videos in landscape, and overall for when you want to and or can take more time to dial in your shot without getting your hands in the way. It also frees up my action button for better purposes like opening the Home app, for example. Speaking of which, if you watched my apartment tour this year, you'll know I recently started implementing HomeKit lights all around my home. And as you can imagine, I use the Home app and Siri to toggle them on and off, which has been game-changing for me in terms of convenience. But now I'm starting to branch off into even more devices that work with the Apple Home app, starting with eufy's E30 Smart Lock, which they were kind enough to send over for me to test out along with sponsoring today's video. This thing is so slick and is designed super well. I feel like I'm James Bond or something when I interact with the built-in keypad and fingerprint sensor, although it still has a key setup as well. Installation was also super simple too, especially if you download the eufy security app and watch their video tutorial. More importantly though, after setup, you can add it to the Home app, which allows you to check locked or unlocked status, and of course, lock or unlock your door with the interface and or Siri when your phone is unlocked, which I love. And beyond the Apple Home app, the E30 is also compatible with other home ecosystems as well, like Amazon's Alexa, Google Home, Samsung SmartThings, and of course eufy's own security app by itself. So far, I absolutely love this thing. It's nice to know I can always check and see if my deadbolt is locked. I'm also happy I can leave my place for a short time without having to carry my keys with me. All I need is my phone, my watch, or just my fingerprint or 8-digit PIN if need be. I can also set an automation for all my lights to turn on if the E30 is unlocked when I arrive home after sunset. It also has an average 8-month battery life with the 8 AA batteries that are included. But yeah, all in all, I'm super happy with this new addition to my HomeKit-centric apartment and can totally recommend you pick one up stat for the added convenience. I'll leave a link in the video description if you're interested in checking it out. So yeah, HomeKit accessories are honestly the best. I plan on adding more to my apartment as time goes on, so stay tuned for that. But anyway, back to the review here. Next up, I want to quickly acknowledge how weirdly amazing the mic quality is on these phones. I'm actually using it right now to record my voice for this portion of the video. I don't know if I'll ever be mixing audio with cinematic mode like Apple wants us to, but whatever they did here, whatever mic tech they upgraded to, damn. I was recording a voice memo randomly the other night and listened to it back, and I thought I was listening to some kind of, Morgan Freeman voiceover or something. You better get busy living or get busy dying. Wow, what an amazing day. Okay, I'll stop with the impressions. I think you get the picture here. Speaking of hardware upgrades though, the smaller Pro finally gets the 120mm equivalent 5x camera we got last year with the 15 Pro Max. I'm a huge sucker for telephoto lenses like this, so I'm super happy to see it here. It still doesn't focus as close as I'd like it to, but it just takes gorgeous compressed images with wonderful depth of field. Video clips also look great with this lens as well, with true optical quality zoom. Although I do think it's worth mentioning, you're probably going to get the best results in ideal lighting conditions since the f2.8 aperture isn't as generous as the f1.7.8 aperture found in the main camera's lens. Nonetheless though, I'm thrilled that 5x is now standard across the board with the Pro line. Something else camera-wise that's improved with both of these new models is the ultra-wide, which has finally gotten a proper upgrade since 2021. As far as I can tell, the lens or optics are similar if not identical, but the sensor is all new with a quad-pixel 48 megapixel resolution that captures noticeably sharper images in the HEIF Max and ProRAW formats. This of course is great for your more typical wide-angle shots of people, places, or things, but it's also fantastic for moments where you want to capture something up close that the 1x camera just can't quite focus on, all the while without sacrificing too much quality. However, I really hope that in the future the default resolution with the ultra-wide photos is 24 megapixels like with the main camera, but for now it seems like this camera is getting the iPhone 14 Pro main camera treatment, where 12 megapixel was still the standard or on by default too. Nonetheless though, I'm so glad they're giving the ultra-wide camera more attention since it's super practical and can actually capture some really compelling stills and videos. There's two more camera features I want to mention though, which are made possible by the new Fusion main camera in both of these phones. I put new in air quotes because at least on paper, this this sensor hasn't increased in resolution or physical size since its introduction with the iPhone 14 Pro. However, according to Apple, this is a second generation quad pixel 48 megapixel sensor that can read data twice as fast as the previous gen. This faster sensor offers two pretty digitally tangible features. The first is a greatly reduced or zero shutter lag, which is pretty evident when you're capturing something happening super quick, or if your hand is shaking a lot when you're taking a picture. This will be great for taking sharper action shots of your kids, family and friends, pets, and more, but the second more exciting feature in my book at least, which is also made possible by the A18 Pro's increased performance, is 4K 120 FPS video recording. While it isn't super practical for more regular video shooting, when you want to capture something that you can play back in true high-res slow motion, or if you have a limited fraction of a second to capture something on video that you want to see clearly, 4K 120 has you covered. Not only that, the quality is really decent as well and doesn't seem to be cropped in. However, I think it's fair to say you're going to get the best results in more ideal lighting conditions since high frame rate video requires a higher shutter speed. In other words, each frame is receiving a bit less light compared to shooting at 60 or 30 FPS. All in all though, 4K 120 recording is a fantastic creative tool to have in your pocket, especially if its quality is best in class or Apple iPhone level. Last up though, I want to talk about, well, you guessed it, Apple Intelligence. I've actually been using the iOS 18.1 beta that introduced it for a minute with both my current and last gen Pro Max daily drivers. With that said, I've had access to a few of the AI features like writing tools, notification summaries, and photo cleanup, and they're definitely nice features to have around, and of course they'll be supplemented by more updates coming this fall and into the next year that will bring the image playground, for example, and more importantly, a proper, intelligent, and contextual Siri that can actually do multiple things for you without you having to open a bunch of apps. Everything considered though, I wouldn't say AI is the reason you should upgrade to these phones, but it's definitely a reason to consider them since they're future-proofed in this regard. But if you want a great deal on a phone that will be able to handle all these advanced features, the 15 Pro and Pro Max used, refurbished, or on sale are definitely still great options. And with that, we get to my major takeaways about these new phones. AI aside, Apple has yet again introduced a handful of subtle but very useful, meaningful quality of life improvements that only continue to refine a phone that wasn't by any means literally perfect before, but was already excellent. If anything, in hindsight, 16 Pro and Pro Max tie up a few of the loose ends left by the 14 Pro and 15 Pro series with regard to battery life and camera capability, not to mention durability and thermals as well, which I'm just mentioning now. When it comes to upgrading though, despite the fact that I'm clearly optimistic about these new phones, I would still only recommend them to people using iPhone 13 Pro or older. Otherwise, based on some pattern recognition and vague reporting, there are bigger changes to come next year which I think are worth the wait. But again though, the iPhone 16 Pro and Pro Max appear to be Apple's final crack at perfecting the iPhone 12 Pro series phones they released 4 years back, and that they did, although it's definitely time for some major design shift or potentially an entirely new form factor as indicated by some whispers from apparent insiders and thoughts from analysts. Nonetheless though, the truth is the iPhone has been really damn good since the 12 series came out, and Apple's slow burn strategy makes a lot of sense. While the rest of the smartphone market is scrambling to remain relevant, profitable, flashy, high-spec, and more, Apple don't fix what ain't broke and continue to polish the products they're proud of while working on some crazy innovations behind the scenes long term. Don't believe me? For example, the iPhone X's iconic design and gorgeous uniformly bordered display apparently took 5 years to develop. So while the iPhone 6s through 7 models were kind of boring and very camera and processor focused, these important advancements were inherited by the 10, 10s, and later 11 Pro models, which I think set Apple up to very rapidly attain an additional 15% of the US market share over the 5 years that followed. In short, it seems that slow and steady always wins the race, especially if you commit to doing less better than more, half-baked, or worse. I prefer evolution over needless revolution any day of the week, but that's another video for a different day. Anyway, thanks for watching my review. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Leave a like on this video. Check out my links to Eufy and my Skyline 3 wallpaper pack down below if you're interested. And as always, I'm Noah, and I will catch you all in the next one.